Hello, everybody, and welcome to Red Wings Daily, presented to you by FanArch. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight, author of The Voices of Hockey. Broadcasters reflect on the fastest game on earth, which has been increasing in sales in the last couple of days since I plugged it. I won't do much more of it today. I know you guys might start to be getting sick of it and saying, get on with the action, but I will say it is available in audio right now. It's on Audible and it's on Apple Books, so check it out. 65 play-by-play broadcasters talking about 35 NHL teams, past and present, and covering 60 years of the NHL firsthand experiences. I do come from southwest corner of Washington State. I am right now 2,454 miles from Little Caesars Arena. Now, the Red Wings are going to be back in action tonight at LCA, looking to rebound from Tuesday night's 3-1 loss against the Kings. They're going to be taking on the Washington Capitals. This is yet another time that the Red Wings are looking for a season sweep. The first two meetings went the Red Wings' way, 5-2 win in Washington. And the very next day, the Red Wings and Washington Capitals commenced again playing in LCA, and the Red Wings won 3-2 in overtime. So both Gibby and Taubes got wins in that 2 games in 2 days, walked away with 4 points. Capitals only walked away with 1 out of a possible 4. So a couple of things about it. The only real injury for the Capitals, as far as players who probably won't be playing, that I know of, a couple of them are day to day, so I don't want to say they're out. But Pierre-Luc Dubois is on the IR, so he's not going to be playing. But also, my second least favorite player is no longer injured. I think he's been healthy for some time now, and that's Tom Wilson. He's always going to be a scoring threat. And let's not forget the huge Russian elephant in the room. That's right, Alexander Ovechkin. On Tuesday night, he scored his 22nd goal of the season. It was a meaningless, pretty goal against the Kraken. I think they lost 4-1 or 5-1 up there in Seattle. But still, he's an offensive threat. And I didn't like some of the things that were happening on Tuesday against the Kings. And so that always makes me think of players like Wilson. I think Strome is actually doing pretty good too offensively, and of course Ovi. So never want to find ourselves getting too tied up and getting too letting the game get ahead of us and out of control and being down 0-1 or 0-2, especially with a team like that. We were able to control that first game in Washington. I think they jumped out to a 4-0 lead at one point before Washington even started scoring a goal or two. And basically, it was pretty much out of reach most of the game. But like I said, if we give up a quick goal here or there, the way we did against the Kings, we can find ourselves not able to jump back into it, especially with the offense that the Capitals are known to have. Now, they're sitting on the outside of the playoff bubble right now. The top 3 teams in the Metro are the Carolina Hurricanes, of course. The Pittsburgh Penguins, as hot as they had been over that period of time, they basically leapfrogged the Islanders. Not only leapfrogged the Islanders, they leapfrogged a couple of teams because they were pretty much on the outside looking in, and the Flyers were in the wild card spot. But the Islanders and the Penguins are also basically the Penguins number 2, Islanders number 3 in the Metro, and then I believe that Washington is probably on the outside looking in right now. So Washington's playing for something. This is going to be the final game of a 6-game road trip for the Capitals. So that's another thing to think about. They may be completely travel logged and dog tired and just maybe thinking one game ahead and like, when are we going to have that first game back at home? So that might work to the Wings' advantage, but never put it past somebody like the Capitals to just try to make something out of this road trip. They are 1-3-1 currently, so basically they're looking to get to make it 2-3-1 or 1-3-2 at the very least. So we'll see how things go. Washington is 11-12-4 away from home, and Detroit is still 18-9-1 despite Tuesday loss. So Gibby's gonna be in the net. As far as goaltenders go, Logan Thompson has a lower goals against average. He's at 2.42. Gibby's is a little bit higher, but I think that's also taken into account the fact, obviously his goals against average is taken into account the 4-7-1 record that started off the season. His GAA has definitely been a lot lower than the 2.42, I would say, being put out by Logan Thompson on the season. So if things go as they're supposed to go on paper, we can be seeing Definitely a better performance out of Gibby. But like I said, it really depends on how we handle the puck and how we keep it out of our own zone, and really don't make those mistakes to get that offense, that sleeping giant that is their offense, up and running. Now, with the Olympics coming up, we know that we're going to have a little bit of a break in between the action for the Red Wings after they play in Utah next Wednesday. So I thought, seeing as how the theme of romance on ice is starting to overtake the Kindle world and the audiobook world and the sports romance world, I thought I could pitch something to y'all right now and see what you think about this. Nothing interferes with pro hockey star Claude Lemieux's game now that he's a right winger for the Colorado Avalanche. He won't let anything jeopardize that. Definitely not the crazy rival Darren McCarty he used to love to hate. Detroit right winger Darren McCarty is everything Claude's not. He's a wiry as he is passionate. He beat on everyone, especially Claude. Used to be they were enemies, now they're friends. The truth could have betrayed the decade-spanning battle that was major sports' greatest rivalry. But now that the shared a stage in Royal Oak, Michigan, secrecy is no longer an option. Well, that seems a little bit taken from a possible book tagline and summary that is definitely not the blood feud between the Detroit Red Wings and the Colorado Avalanche, but it is a little bit true in the sense that if you've watched the season or the documentary Unrivaled, you'll know that, in fact, Claude Lemieux and Darren McCarty, the stars of Bloody Wednesday, the turtling Claude Lemieux and the punch savvy Darren McCarty have in fact become friends over the years, and that's the backdrop of the Unrivaled documentary that came out in 2022. Now, obviously, the theater, which was the Red Wings Avalanche rivalry of the mid-90s to the early 2000s, was pretty much the best rivalry I would ever think that anybody can possibly imagine, at least over the last 50 years. Now, obviously, there's been bloodier rivals out there. Boston and Montreal obviously is one that comes to mind. Even Detroit, Toronto, Detroit, Chicago come to mind. But when you have 5 Stanley Cups over a 7-year span shared between two teams, and they have to go through each other most of the times en route to those Stanley Cup championships, they faced each other 3 times in the Western Conference Final there between 96 and 2002. And obviously, once they were done with each other, whether it went 7 games or 6 games, the team that faced them in the next round just had absolutely no chance whatsoever. If you look at it, 96, Detroit, Colorado. Colorado beats them in 6 and then goes on to sweep the Panthers. In 97, Detroit wins in 6, goes on to sweep the Flyers. And in the 2002, it goes the full 7. Detroit wins, and then they go on to beat Carolina 4 games to 1 in the Stanley Cup final. So as we're talking rivalries, and this one is obviously turned from the blood feud as the Red Wings have left the Western Conference 13 years ago. It's just good to know that there was a spark, and obviously for the sake of just humanity, these two are friends. It doesn't make me feel like one is a traitor or the other. Obviously on the Red, from our side, we'd have to sit there and say, is Darren McCarty a traitor? No, he's grown up. He was purely into the competitiveness that game presented, and he was always a fighter, and he brought the fight with it. He was quoted before that March 26th game about Lemieux, basically, and so it was no secret that he was gunning for him, and he went after him, and that's exactly what happened. And the crowd was alight. It was a great atmosphere, and it propelled them to win the cup. Basically, maybe within 2 months of that, just a little over 2 months, I'd say. So obviously, they've played again. They've played their old timers games against each other. It was pretty much feud free, and I think that was, I don't know how long ago that was. That was almost about 10 years ago now, that they did the whole old timers games. But if you think about all the Hall of Famers during that rivalry, it wasn't just on the Detroit side. You have Joe Sakic, Patrick Waugh, Peter Forsberg, Adam Foote. Let's see, what's another one? Well, Claude Lemieux. Claude Lemieux wasn't there all the time for that. He went and ended up playing in New Jersey and won another cup with them. So this is definitely one for the ages, but I just wanted to have a little fun because the author whose premise and summary that I was kind of pantomiming and doing a little bit of a Weird Al Yankovic kind of parody of it. The 7th book of her series is called Unrivaled. So if you're going to take that term, we're going to take it back in a different way. I feel like this is what a rivalry is all about. But good for you. Good on you for selling millions of books and getting an HBO series. Hey, maybe there'll be an HBO series on Red Wings Daily. Who knows sometime? I don't know. But I seriously doubt it. But as I make my case for that, it is Thursday, which means it's Throwback Thursday. So for today's edition of Throwback Thursday, we're going to go back to May 12, 2013. Now, this was Game 7 of the Western Conference quarterfinals between the Detroit Red Wings and the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I bring this one up because this is the last series, in the playoff series, that the Red Wings have won. This is going on 13 years now. They've gone 9 seasons without a playoff appearance, but this was the last time that they actually won a series. Now, basically, going back to May 12th, okay, this series featured 4 overtime games, including 3 straight. Now, Game 7 was not an overtime game, but it was another 1-goal game. So 5 1-goal games out of a possible 7. Just chew on that a little bit. Now, Jimmy Howard was the one in goal for the Red Wings. Jonas Hiller was in the goal for the Ducks. Looking at it, 33-32 shots on goal in favor of Anaheim. So Jimmy Howard basically made 31 saves. Jonas Hiller made 29, it looks like. Gave up the 3. And one of those goals started the scoring, Heinrich Zetterberg. We haven't really mentioned him a lot. Obviously we're not throwing back too much. But Heinrich Zetterberg was an all-out star, an offensive weapon for the Red Wings for quite some time, which lends to my argument that he could have his number retired eventually. I think somebody actually is using it right now, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll save that awkward conversation for another day. But other goals that were scored was a shorthanded goal by Justin Abdelkader. Now, that's got to be one of those moments that Anaheim looks back at and says, that is when we lost the series. We gave up a shorthanded goal while we were on the power play. So it was an unassisted goal, obviously, probably a breakaway, turnover, and caught them on their heels, and he basically beat Hiller for that. And then Filppula, basically, Valtteri Filppula, got the insurance goal. The only really goal that made it more interesting for the Ducks was Francois Betjeman, who made it a one-shot game with just a little over 3 minutes to go. Detroit held on. That was basically their second straight. They were down 3-2 after their overtime loss in Game 5. Came back and won in overtime in Game 6, and then won this one in regulation. And then they went to win 3 of the next 4 against Chicago, against Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews and Duncan Keith and Corey Crawford and all those guys for the Blackhawks. But unfortunately, those 3 of the next 4 were the last wins they would have, as they gave up 3 straight, wins to Chicago. And everything was sealed up for the Wings playoff run that year by Seabrook's goal in overtime in Game 7 at United Center. So I like to look back at this as the last moment. I had a cheerful postseason hoorah in my living room in Las Vegas, watching the Wings hold on to that game and hold on to that lead and not let it slip and basically move on to round 2. And they really made Chicago sweat. If If you recall, that was a lot of original six in that playoff season. Obviously, original six matchup there in the second round between the Red Wings and the Blackhawks, but the Blackhawks ended up in the Stanley Cup final taking on the Boston Bruins. So yet another original six Stanley Cup final in 2013, folks. And we're not talking about, pre 1967 and second six expansion. There was still a Stanley Cup final and championship featured two original six teams. Yes, as late as 2013. So it's still the hottest ticket in town, and obviously was that year too. It was pretty strong, Stanley Cup final. That was one of those ones that really I think that the Bruins might have been the ones that everybody thought might have been the ones to beat on this because of their defensive mind and Zdeno Chara and all the ways they played it. But, Chicago found a way and won their second cup, and that was at the point second cup in 4 years. Then they would win one two seasons later to make it the trifecta. So obviously, a good moment to look back on for the Red Wings is that win in the Honda Center in Anaheim. But yes, that was the last basically celebration on the ice and in the locker room for the Red Wings in a postseason series. Hopefully there will be more to come. Hopefully this season. Well, as we wrap up the show, I just want to do a quick Atlantic Idol. Basically talk about how the division is going into Thursday's game against Washington. Red Wings basically still 1 point back of Tampa Bay. The only team that played yesterday in the Atlantic Division was Ottawa, and they beat Colorado. So speaking of Colorado, they made it into this series or into this show today in two different segments. So yes, it was actually I think they won by 3 goals. I think it was like 5-2 that they won. It wasn't in Colorado. It was in Ottawa. So Colorado's swimming around in their road trip, and they're going to be coming in through Detroit here in a couple of days. But obviously, Ottawa, with that win, basically came up to a virtual tie for 7th place with Toronto. So we got Toronto and Ottawa tied there, and they're 2 points behind Florida. So 2 points separating seeds, or not seeds, but positioning 6, 7, and 8 in the Atlantic. Now, as far as 3, 4, and 5, that is shared between the Buffalo Sabres, Montreal Canadiens, and Boston Bruins. Now, Buffalo has basically the positioning atop of there. They're sitting at 3rd right now because they have 2 games in hand over the Bruins. Montreal and they have 1 game in hand over Montreal. Montreal is sitting in the 4 spot because I think they have 1 game in hand over the Bruins. So you got a tight race right there for 3, 4, and 5 right there, seeing as who's going to get that. If it turns out this way, continuing on the season, it's one of those, if the playoffs start today, which one of these 3 is on the outside looking in? And it might be a tough pill to swallow if you have that, the same amount of points as number 3, but you lose a tiebreaker, and you even lose a tiebreaker for seeds 7 or 8. So this, tonight's game will make a decision for the Red Wings if they can stay with Tampa Bay in that, and we'll just have to see. But there's a bit of a bottleneck at the top of the Atlantic right now. You got, Red Wings and Tampa Bay are separated by 1 point. So 3, 4, and 5 are separated by no points. And then 6, 7, and 8 are separated by 2 points. It's going to be a tight one. It's a great division, and it's a successful division. I look over at the Pacific Division in the Western Conference, and I look at the Golden Knights having just a ridiculous amount of overtime and shootout losses, yet they're still sitting up there in first because of just the way that the rest of the division is playing. Edmonton really hasn't broken out of some kind of shell that they should be. Obviously, that's something that they usually save for the latter part of the season, and maybe that's what's happening. And then you got Anaheim, who just can't decide whether or not they want to be in or out of it. Seattle's still hanging tough. So that's the Pacific for you. But anyway, the Atlantic is looking tight, looking competitive, and we'll just see as we get into this break before the Olympics who's sitting where. Obviously, there's just 3 more games before this break for the Red Wings. 2 of them are at home. And actually, there's 4 games. 2 of them at home, 2 of them are on the road, and 2 of them are against Colorado too. So definitely a tale of twos right there. And it's going to be a tough one. And Utah is the other road game that they're going to have to face. So it's no, they're not going to be, they're not going to travel that far from Denver to Salt Lake, but they're still going to be playing 2 very competitive and very strong teams in that Central Division right there to basically go into that break. And coming out of the break, they're hopefully not going to be having to have such a tough row to hoe. But this has been Red Wings Daily, folks, presented to you by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight. Again, check out The Voices of Hockey, available on Audible and on Apple Books. And LGRW from the PNW.